Okay, we're going to get it started. Thank you everyone for being here. I know you're all busy. It's a little snowy here in Ontario and it's cold. I really appreciate everybody taking the time to join this webinar tonight. Really excited to see a lot of familiar faces. And so I just quick housekeeping items. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and I'll get to them at the end. Please make sure you're on mute. When we get to the Q&A at the end, we will basically have time if we need to take someone off mute and basically have a conversation. So without further ado, we'll get started on this. So we're talking about building wealth tonight. Who loves that? I'm sure we all love it. So we're talking about multifamily development fundamentals and the opportunities in 2025. What are the opportunities? There's lots of news going around. I'm sure everybody's, staying on top of what's happening, and they want to know what are the opportunities here. So a little bit about myself. So my name is Ali Nazarian, in case you don't know me. I'm sure by now you know my name. Yeah, so I'm an engineer turned real estate developer, investor, and coach. Actually, I have my very first supervisor when I was an intern years ago in the crowd here. So this is amazing. And I have some of my, yeah, that's Gary Mella. And it's quite unbelievable. It's been many years, so really great to see. He's been a great mentor to me in my engineering career. I also have some great friends here who have helped me throughout, my life and my career in real estate and whatnot. So really appreciate everyone being here. So yeah, about 13 plus years experience in engineering, project management, and risk management. I started getting into real estate about 2015, 2016. I started investing in 2016. And in 2017, I started doing developments with basically building a house for myself in Alberta. I've been passionate about housing development for a long time. When I was a kid, I used to go and watch houses being built. And it was always fascinating for me when, these engineers and architects and builders, there was a piece of dirt, some material, and, they would put some ideas together and, that would become somebody's house. So that was always fascinating for me. But yeah, I'm very passionate about housing development. I love innovation. I'm an engineer, mechanical engineer by trade. And I also I'm very passionate about energy efficiency. That's where kind of like my mechanical engineering comes basically handy. So right now, in terms of my portfolio, it's about 90 units owned, co-owned with partners or under development across Canada. We're active in Ontario, Alberta, and New Brunswick. So a little bit about my company, EcoLux Developments. We are basically a full service, full development management and consulting firm established in 2017, like I mentioned, and our vision has been developing and building energy efficient, purpose-built rental buildings that will support healthy living for the occupants and generate above average returns. That has not changed since the first building, the house that I built for myself. I put a lot of energy efficiency items in there. And I've stayed kind of committed to that till today. And the vision and the mission is to help multifamily investors and developers achieve success in their projects. There are three main areas that we focus on is development management, development consulting, and energy efficiency solutions. Just a little more detail of our services, basic development management, consulting. We do feasibility studies for multifamily purpose-built rental developments, financial modeling, basically returns and whatnot, market research, and also energy efficiency solutions. sub-metering, energy efficiency items, and things like that. So jumping right in. Oh, sorry. Before we jump right in, select projects. I guess I'm a slide behind. So these are some of the projects that we're currently working on or we have worked on before. We'll touch on some of these throughout the evening. So who wants to own a cash flowing property and be able to get a good sleep at night? Can we get some raises hands? Can use the virtual hand raise, or you can actually raise your hand. I'm sure we all love that. That's the dream, to have a cash flow property, to make money while you're sleeping. Warren Buffett says if you're not making money in your sleep, you are doing something wrong. So we all love that. But there's a catch. For those who own rental properties, what are the common issues? Maybe put it in the chat. Let's make this interactive. Let's put some of the items in the chat that you think are the issues that you deal with when you own a property. What are the common issues? Don't be shy. Put it in the chat. There's no right or wrong answer. I'm going to give it a minute. Also, it's a test to make sure everybody's paying attention. Put it in the chat. Okay. Turnovers. Exactly. Paying, yeah, tenants, appliances breaking, dishwasher not working, management, taking tenant calls. Justin Trudeau being prime minister, that's a problem in many aspects of our lives. Getting the right tenants, flooding. Those are all great answers. So here's a real word cloud of that. Frequent repairs. When you own an older building, especially if you're like a multifamily, frequent repairs are a common thing. Mold is an issue, roof leaks, sewer backups, mold, foundation leaks, rent control. If you're in Ontario and you own a building that was built before November 2018, there's rent control. There's insurance challenges. If you own a building that's like 100 years old and you have knob and tube, it might have a great cash flow, but you're going to have insurance challenges, plumbing leaks. Old buildings are prone to that. So we might be able to buy some old buildings. And for those, I'm sure most people are here in Canada, but I see a few names that are from US. When you buy a building that's like 50, 60 years old, you're bound to have these issues. It might look like you can make a lot of money when you run your pro forma, but repair and maintenance will quickly eat away from your profits. And God forbid if you get structural issues, the big one in that word cloud, or you have to replace the roof. These are all problems that are almost unpredictable, and you have to keep a big reserve for that. So those are common issues. So keeping that in mind, that kind of defeats the purpose of trying to get a good night's sleep while you're making a cash flow because tenants are waking you up, or your property manager calls you with issues, or you're not getting the best tenants possible. So before we get any further, I want to do a quick disclaimer here. So the information provided here tonight is for educational purposes only, general information, and does not constitute investment, financial, or professional advice or offering of securities. Participants are responsible for obtaining independent legal, accounting, and financial advice from licensed professionals before making any investment decisions. So I'm not making any recommendations. These are just my experience and my views on the items. But with that basically idea, let's talk about multifamily. Let's just quickly go back to the basics, just making sure everybody's on the same page of what we're talking about here. So a multifamily, for the context that we're talking about here, is a residential building or complex designed to accommodate 5 or more self-contained units. And it can range from smaller walk-up apartments to large high-rises. For context, sometimes we call buildings or properties that are 4 units and below, we call them multiplexes. But when we say multifamily, And this is a CMHC definition, which is the Canadian Housing Mortgage Corporation. When we say multifamily, that's 5 units and above. And like we said, it can take different shapes. This is what we typically know when we say multifamily, an apartment building, but it can be a high rise. This is actually a property in Toronto. It's a luxury, brand new 50-story purpose-built rental building that originally was this little house on the lot, and they've added this to the back. But a multifamily could be in the shape of a stacked townhome style. Or it could be an old 150 plus. That's actually one of our buildings in New Brunswick. It's a 6-unit. Or it could be basically a more modern, smaller development. So when we say multifamily, it's anything that's 5+ units. And why multifamily? Just again, going back to the basics, it's a great source of passive income. We all love that. That's what we were just talking about. It's a source of passive income. It's a reliable source. It's been time tested throughout decades and maybe even centuries, who knows? It's less risky than other real estate assets or real estate properties. If you own a single family home and your tenant doesn't pay your rent and you're in Ontario, that's 100% of your rent gone. Or if the market fluctuates and the market tanks and you can't sell it, you're having difficulty with the property. Or if the interest rates go up and it's not carrying itself, that's going to be an issue, and you're more exposed to basically on a smaller scale, like issues that can come up and eat into your profits. But when you're talking about like a 10 unit, 20 unit, 50 units, if 1 or 2 tenants don't pay rent, that's a small portion of your income. So your ship is not going to sink as quickly per se. It's also easier to manage. You have one roof, you have one boiler. If you have a boiler, you basically have proximities. They're all under one roof. It's one address. You have one property management to deal with it. So it's a lot more efficient for management. It's easier for financing. When you go to 5+ units, and we'll touch on it a little bit later, the qualification for financing doesn't depend solely on your personal income. It actually is based on the income from the property itself. Obviously, you have to meet certain requirements in terms of credit worthiness and whatnot. But in terms of income, you're not limited to your income like you are on a residential, which is less than 5 units. Also, it's a great generational wealth creation. We'll touch that on the next slide. But a lot of families or family offices, and a lot of very wealthy people, they made their wealth by owning multifamily apartment buildings. It's high demand. There's high demand for housing, especially in Canada. We have housing crisis. We'll touch on that a little bit later. But there's always demand for housing. A lot of things can change in life: technology, AI, machine learning, computers. But people always need a roof over their head. They always need a place to sleep. AI will never replace your house. It might help build it faster, or make the management or the energy efficiency a lot smarter, but it doesn't take away from the fact that people still need a place to live. It's an essential need. So there's always demand for it. And also, multifamily has potential for higher than average returns when compared to a lot of different investments. It's more stable, especially at the larger scale. The bigger it is, the more stable it is. So these are some of the highlights. I'm sure a lot of you guys are familiar with this, but just worth mentioning that. Also, to basically making sure we're covering the basics, we want to understand where does the value of a multifamily property comes from. Unlike residential property, a single family home and whatnot, that is based on comparables of what your neighbors sold their property for, or what is the sentiment in the market. Value of multifamily property is like a business. It's directly related to the net operating income, just like a business. So net operating income is income minus expenses minus the vacancy. Very simple. You get some rent, you pay for your utilities or whatever expenses, property management, taxes, you have some vacancies, and that becomes your net operating income. We divide that by the cap rate. The cap rate is the measure of the expected returns from the property. It's a measure of the property's expected rate of return, and is typically derived from the comparable sales and data in the market. It's almost like a multiplier. You know, a lot of businesses, you look at the net operating income, and then there's a multiplier applied to that, and that's what drives the value of the property. It's the same in a multifamily property. So based on this formula, you can see the higher your net operating income is the higher your property value. And so we know rents over time generally go up. Sometimes they might slow down a little bit, come down for a year or two, but eventually over time they will always go up. And it's important to understand that investing in multifamily is a long-term game. It's not if you buy it this year and next year you're rich. It's getting rich slowly over time, and that's why we say it's a generational wealth creation. So rents going up over time, basically your NOI goes up and your property value goes up. We're not speculating here. We're not thinking that, oh, I'm buying this stock and I'm going to sell it tomorrow for 10 times the value. That may happen, but we're not relying on that when it comes to multifamily. There are four major profit centers in any real estate deal. Just quickly mention that there's your cash flow, there's your basically mortgage pay down, your forced appreciation, and your basically market appreciation. So in a multifamily scenario, when you keep it over time, you're basically benefiting from all these four profit centers. So again, why multifamily development? Sorry, not again. We're talking about why development. So we established why we love multifamily. It's a great wealth creation asset. It's a proven strategy. But why are we talking about developing multifamily? So here's a list of the basically top 7 items that, in my opinion, are the reasons why development is such a hot topic right now, especially in Canada. It's a solution to the housing crisis. When we buy an existing building, we renovate it, we own it, we're not really helping the housing crisis that we have been facing in Canada. When we are doing development, we're actually putting new units into the market. We are helping alleviate the housing crisis. There's a lot of government support. There's never in the history of Canada, or in the recent history at least, all 3 layers of government have been aligned to support putting more units into the market because of the housing crisis. It's such a hot topic. It's a political topic, but it's really an existential topic in Canada. So there's a lot of support on that. And I'll show you some basically screenshots from news headlines talking about this in a second here. There are a lot of financial incentives. We'll touch on those. There's a lot of government programs to encourage more developments, from reduced development charges to better financing. There's a range of supports. There's like even grants available if you're willing to do basically some affordable housing and whatnot. There are potential for higher returns, and we will touch on that why new developments will have better returns. A very simple version of that is that you're going to have much lower maintenance costs. You know, all those issues that we talked about, with a new development, you're not going to have these issues for like easily for 10, 15, 20, 25 years. There's room for creativity. This is honestly my favorite topic because you can basically get very creative. Again, back to that formula that we talked about. You can get creative with how you generate additional income. We're not going to have time to talk about that today, but there are multiple ways. There's, laundry used to be what was a common additional income, but you can make money from parking, from Wi-Fi, from EV charging stations. There are multiple ways you can do that. Self-storage. So there's a lot of room for creativity. There is huge demand for new purpose-built rentals. People like new. I don't think anybody can argue with that. Tenants love new. There's a change in the appetite of the tenants and renters. They like new purpose-built rentals. They specifically like purpose-built because, as the name implies, it's purpose-built for rentals. They're designed with tenants in mind. They're not like a shoebox condo that was built with investors in mind. So that's a huge difference, and people love that. And you will see that is shown in the statistics that actually that's the next point is more resilient to market fluctuations. And I'll show you some latest statistics that shows purpose-built rentals are a lot more resilient to fluctuations in rent. Again, because of the tenants' appetite that they like more and new products. Quality of life, we can say, is more important to tenants these days than ever before. And no rent control. If you're in Ontario and we all hate rent control. So if you build a new purpose-built rental, they don't fall under rent control. So you can increase your rent as the market allows. So here's some of the headlines. So this is Urbanation Rentals, the quarter 4 2024 market stats. We all know the rents have become a little bit softer, but as you can see, it says purpose-built rents remain stable, and purpose-built rentals only experienced a 0.3% year-over-year decrease, whereas single-family homes and townhomes have dropped by 5 to 7%. So that shows how resilient purpose-built rentals are. They're more in demand. Again, housing crisis. There's no shortage of these kind of news. Housing crisis is a feature, not a bug. It's basically a feature of the country at this point, and it's going to take a while to fix. There's no end in sight for housing crisis. Canada's housing affordability crisis will persist for years despite rate cuts. These are all latest news. This is from September 2024. This one is an interesting one. With the recent changes in immigration, there's fewer homes needed in Canada, but the reality is the housing crisis is far, far from being over. Speaking of government supports, now Toronto is talking about allowing 5 to 6 plexes. This is fresh off the press, January 21st. This was basically tabled at City Council. So that's an experimental that they're going to do in Scarborough. We'll touch on that a little bit later. Again, talking about government support, Vaughan has slashed development charges in a bid to spark building. Other GTA cities are expected to follow suit. This one also fresh off the press. This is like from, I think, Monday. It was announced that Mississauga is proposing reducing the development charges by 50% across the board and 100% for anything that's 3-bedroom purpose-built rentals only. And you can defer the development charges as well. So as you can see, there's no shortage of support from government, and basically they're trying to encourage investors to build more purpose-built rentals. So this is what we're talking about. I know this is top of mind for a lot of people in the real estate space, that what is going to happen now with the reduced immigration in Canada. And this is a study that was recently published by Oxford Economics and Javier Analytics. Originally, they were expecting that we're going to have 2.9 million shortage of houses by 2035. With the new immigration targets, that we need 400,000 less buildings or houses, but we still need 2.5 million by 2035. So this is a November 24 forecast after the announced immigration. So the fundamentals of demand for housing is not changing. And the dip that we're seeing today is mostly because of the students being basically not, student visas not being issued as much. But it's a temporary effect. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So with that, let's talk about what is development. What are we talking about here? So definition of development is basically the process involving the evaluation, acquisition, planning, design, engineering, financing, and construction of improvements on a plot of land according to applicable codes regulations set by the municipalities and regulatory agencies. There's a lot packed into that definition, but some of the highlights are basically shows the steps involved in development, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But it also like highlights like it has to be according to regulations set by municipalities and regulatory agencies, which has been traditionally an issue in Canada. And as we were talking about, this is being a little bit relaxed now because government realized that they have created more of a problem than a solution. So let's talk about a very common question that I get from investors or people that is like, who is who in a development? What is the difference between a developer and a builder? Sometimes when we talk with people, it's like, hey, I'm a developer. They're like, so you build houses. I'm like, yes, but that's not the only part. So let's talk about who's a developer and who's a builder. So developer is basically the entity or the person primarily responsible for the planning, financing, oversight of a real estate project. And they're basically responsible for the entire project from start to finish. And in the case of a rental development, they often basically operate the building as well, or if they're doing the development for the owners of the land, basically that's when they hand it over to the operations team. But the builder is is basically often referred to as the general contractor, is basically responsible for the physical construction of the project and not the entire project. And that's really the main difference. They are basically the builder is the contractor that is hired by the developer to execute the construction piece. And they work with the developer, architects, and engineers to basically build the actual building. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. So let's talk about development management. So when we talk about doing a development, we're basically referring to development management. So development management is basically the process of overseeing that life cycle of a development project from identifying a potential development site, doing the due diligence, doing the planning, doing the design, and basically coming up with the vision and then managing the construction, marketing, sale, or leasing of the asset. And who's the development manager? Basically, development manager who's doing all of these work and is the person that's acting as the key point of contact. Is basically the project manager, if you like, for the development. But usually when we say project manager, that kind of refers to the construction piece of the work. But it's important to distinguish that construction is only one piece of the puzzle in the whole life cycle of a development. There's a lot that goes into basically the project before the construction and after or in parallel to the construction. So basically, to put it in summary, development manager is the person sitting in the middle. Basically, you have multiple hands doing multiple things, or maybe you have a team that there's like basically you're delegating. So your work starts from the site acquisition, is identifying the site. Is this even the right site to do the development? That's basically a big difference when you're buying multifamily. It's already designed and envisioned. You're not really just you're not questioning if this is the right unit mix or not. But as a developer, that's what you need to do. You need to make sure the site that you're acquiring is actually fit for what you're trying to build. Planning the project, basically deciding what unit mix, what unit sizes you need to put into building. That requires basically market research, understanding the market. Sometimes you have to hire a market research company to basically identify market trends and decide what is the plan, what is the vision for this project. You're also doing, as the development manager, you're basically doing the financial management as well. You're managing the project budget. You're basically coming up with the numbers in the beginning. You're running the financial analysis. You're creating the pro forma. You're doing the financial modeling to know what your returns are going to be. These are all responsibilities of the development manager. The next stage is the design and engineering. This is actually a very important part. You're working with the architects, with the engineers to basically design a building, but you need to keep the tenants in mind, like we talked about. In a purpose-built rental, there are certain considerations. It's interesting to know that on average, rental units are bigger than built-for-sale condos because tenants are basically paying for a service and there they have certain expectations. Whereas in a condo, the buyers are basically buying it as an investment. So those are very small things that are very important as you're working with your designers and your architects. You can't just hand it over to an architect or engineers and tell them, here it is, just build it for me, and let me know when it's done. You'll definitely will run into issues if you do that, not from a code perspective or being able to build it, but it may not become a product that's desirable for the tenant. So that's the role of the developer or the development manager, to make sure you're working with your designers or architects based on your market research, based on your feasibility study, to make sure you're designing a product that's going to be desirable when you put it on the market for rent. And then we come to the construction. That's the part that everybody can see. You're physically seeing things changing. Up to this point, nothing is physically changing. It's very hard to see progress because nothing is physically changing. But when it comes to the construction management, basically, again, it's the role of the development manager to select the right construction team, select the right builders and contractors, and oversee the construction process, including basically coordinating the selection, quality control, monitoring the progress. All that work basically is on the development manager. And then while that construction is going on, the development manager will be busy working with the marketing and sales team if it's for sale. But in this context tonight, we're talking about leasing. There's a lot that goes into the marketing, especially if you're getting into larger developments that are like 20, 30, 50 units. You have to think about marketing your property. It's not something that once you're finished and you have your building is complete and you're ready to move in, now you start thinking about, okay, I'm just going to put it on Facebook Marketplace and the building is going to fill up. No, you can do that on a smaller developments if you have like 3, 4, 5 units. But when you get to like 10, 20, 15 unit buildings, you need to start putting a marketing plan in place. Maybe I'll show you at the end. We actually just finished our leasing website for our 14-unit building in London. And sometimes you need to start doing pre-leasing. I'm sure you get that on your phone sometimes, like buildings that are coming up for lease. They start, I would say, like typically 2 to 3 months, depending on the size of the building. Before the building is done, you need to start doing your marketing, pre-qualifying potential tenants, creating a list, so then you can minimize the time that it takes to fill up the building and start basically getting cash flow. That's the ultimate goal. And then the next is basically legal and regulatory compliance. Obviously, when you're doing your project, you got to make sure everything stays within the legal boundaries, regulations, safety on site, and things like that. Even the leasing process, there's a lot of regulations related to that, like things with discrimination and whatnot. So you got to make sure that you're doing the work correctly and you're not going to run into any issues down the road. So basically, the development manager is the person in the center of all of this. There are people involved doing each of these components, your marketing team, your construction team, your designers, but development manager is the person that is in the center of all of these and making sure everything is moving smoothly. If I was to put it by an example, basically the developer is the conductor of an orchestra. All those people are the musicians that are sitting around. They're all experts in what they do. They play their own instruments. But without the conductor, you will not have a nice orchestra and a nice music being played. So think of the development manager as the conductor of the orchestra. Okay, so let's jump into what are the steps involved in a development, in a typical development project, and what's the roadmap? So the very first step on the left, as I guess we go from left to right, basically is the identification of the site and the acquisition. You basically need to make sure we're identifying the right site. You know, we always say we don't want to rush in buying the land. We have to make sure we have enough time for due diligence. Those are the conditions that we put into the purchase. But there's certain things that we can do. We can do a quick zoning check. We look at the area, like basically we say location, location, location. There's a lot that goes into that. I'll walk through this quickly and then we'll go a little bit more detail. So very first step is identifying the appropriate site, a suitable site, and negotiating in terms of the purchase. Second step is ideation and the concepts. Basically, that's where you analyze the market, basically looking at what's in need. Do we need 2 bedrooms? Do we need 1 bedroom? Do we need 3 bedrooms? What the municipalities are encouraging? Are there any incentives? Like we looked at, sometimes 3 bedrooms have incentives. And then that plays all into the concept. And basically, we come up with some concepts, or sometimes we call it massing. Then we have to do our financial feasibility and underwriting. Basically, this is where we do the financial modeling, we determine the potential revenues and expenses, and we perform the financial modeling. After that, after we confirm the concept, basically, you might have a couple of different concepts in this stage. You do your financial modeling, you run the numbers, and you basically decide on your concept. And then you get into the design and permitting. This is where we work with architects and engineers. If we need to do any approvals beforehand, we need to do that. We'll touch on that a little bit later. And then basically, that's where you design the building. And then kind of like this overlaps a little bit. At the same time, you're looking at financing and where you're going to get the capital. Because until you design your building and you determine your cost, it's hard to know how much exactly you're going to need. So you need to work on the financing and the capital requirements. And then you get basically into the procurement and the construction. That's basically where you're selecting and hiring your contractors, overseeing the construction process. And then, like mentioned, you will do marketing and lease up, basically overlaps a little bit with the construction. And basically, that's the final stage. And then after that, it's basically the operations team that will take over. So let's look at each of these steps in a little bit more detail. So site identification and acquisition. So like I mentioned, location, location, location. Those are the 3 most important rules in real estate. And it's location, location, location. We're going to make sure we're picking the right location for the right product. You know, that's very important. One location might be good for a certain type of product, and some other location might be good for a different type. If you're targeting, seniors and empty nesters, you might want to be a little bit out of the busy downtown core. You want to be in a more quiet area. You might want to have, a little bit more space for amenities. But in a smaller site, maybe in a more urban area, downtown, closer to downtown areas, might be more suitable for young professionals and maybe even students who are closer to university. So site location, it kind of gets tied into with what's the vision for the development. So the first 2 steps, all these steps, actually, this is important to keep in mind. A lot of these steps overlap with each other, and sometimes you're going back and forth between them. So the first thing you want to check is the as of right zoning. What does this zoning allow? Zoning is basically the regulations that tells you what you can and cannot build on a site. So uh, that's the first thing you want to check, and you want to see what is as of right now without doing any basically zoning changes or anything like that. You want to look around your area. What are the amenities? What are the transportation options? Because that will play into the role of, like, in terms of parking requirements, and even like, do you even have enough space for parking and whatnot? Again, who's your target basically tenants, and this will play a role in your site selection. Site dimensions and condition. This is very important. This is where you do a little bit more due diligence. Do you expect any basically environmental issues on this site? Does it look like, was there a gas station there before? So you want to know the site conditions. Are there grading issues? Are there, like, big elevation changes on site? So you want to pay attention to those. And then you want to put a conditional offer. So you do a certain checks before you put an offer, but generally you don't want to spend money until the lot or the land is under contract. Before you lock it up, you don't want to spend money on doing any due diligence, paying professionals to do those reports. So once you put a conditional offer, we generally try to get 60 to 90 days. The longer, the better. And then there's other strategies that you can implement during your acquisition. You can look at a vendor take back, basically the vendor giving you a loan for the purchase. It happens in basically, especially if you're dealing with vacant land, because they're not as liquid. Sometimes the owners, if they don't have a loan on it, they're willing to give you a vendor take back. Sometimes you can JV with the landowners. It might be interesting to know a lot of those larger high-rise developments we see in, like, places like downtown Vancouver or Toronto. The developers, they're not buying the land. They're joint venturing, or they're partnering with the landowners, because they're often owned by some families who bought that land long time ago and they don't have any mortgage on it. So that's a kind of a risk mitigation. We don't have time to get into that detail tonight. But that's a strategy. And then if you can get a long closing, that's always better, because you can start getting your permits and whatnot and financing before you actually close on the property, and you're responsible for all the financing of the property. And then, so next step is ideation and concepts. This is a very, very important piece. And it's often overlooked. Sometimes people jump into, like, let's go get the plans and let's start construction. I want to see progress on site. I want to put shovel in the ground. But that often leads to issues down the road. So you want to basically put some good amount of effort and energy into basically creating ideas and concepts of what you're building here. For those who have read the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, it always says start with the end in mind, and that can't be any more true when you're dealing with a purpose-built rental. You need to think about who your target tenants are. What is the demographic? What's the avatar of your tenants, your ideal tenant? Are they young professionals? Do they have kids? Are they in their 50s and 60s or 70s? Are they retirees? Do they have a lot of visitors? Even their lifestyles. Do they spend a lot of time at home, or are they more out and about? A lot of, like, 20, 30-year-olds these days, they don't spend a lot of time at home. They're, like, out in the gym, or they're socializing. Are you close to a university? Are people are likely to be sharing the unit, or is it mostly like couples, maybe with one small kid? These will all play a role into basically the second point there, your unit mix and unit sizes. I can't emphasize enough how important this is. Unit size and unit mix is basically what makes or breaks your deal. If you go and build, I'll use an example. You're building a 24 unit in downtown Toronto, and you put units that are 1,000 square feet, 2 bedroom, 1 bath. Does anybody think anything is wrong with that? I'm sure a lot of you would think there's something wrong with that. First of all, in downtown Toronto, you don't need 1,000 square feet. Also, if you're putting 1,000 square feet, you probably want to put a 3 bedroom and 2 bathroom in there to maximize basically the space. Uh, but also downtown Toronto, you might get some families, downtown core, but it's less likely to get families with kids. So if you have 3 bedrooms, you're likely going to get 3 people sharing this apartment. So you want to make sure you have at least 3 bedrooms. If you're putting a 2 bedroom, you don't need 1,000 square feet. But also, if you're in downtown Toronto, again, it's likely that people are going to be sharing that place because the rent is probably going to be like, $3,000 a month. Um, so you gotta make sure that what you're designing is fit for what you're trying to achieve. Uh, I would appreciate if everybody mutes themselves. Uh, okay, I'm going to mute everyone. Everybody can still hear me, I guess. So that is very important, and that will play into your pro forma because a 2 bedroom unit will bring a certain amount of rent. Let's call it like $2,500. Whether if it's 700 square feet or 1,000 square feet, you might get slightly more rent for a bigger unit, but your construction cost is going to go up. So your numbers are not gonna work because again, back to the formula, your value of your property is related to how much income you're bringing. But if you just build a bigger building, the value of your building is not gonna go up as much, but your cost is gonna go up when you're going to build it. So it's very important. You saw that high-rise building, those companies spend tens of thousands of dollars. And I'm not lying, I know this for a fact, tens of thousands of dollars. It starts at $20,000, $30,000 on market research to just identify the trends in the market and in terms of basically amenities in the building, unit size and unit mix, and where the trend is going, because they know by the time they build this building is going to be a couple of years. The smaller the building, the less you have to worry about that. Sometimes it could be, if you're doing a 5 unit development in downtown Toronto, basically a conversation with your realtors or property manager would probably suffice. So from there, you're basically deriving your total buildable area. Again, back to like if you have 5 unit or 10 units, do you make them 1,000 square feet or do you make them at 500 square feet? That's going to play into your buildable area, which is basically in turn is going to translate into your cost to build. You also have to decide about your build form. Are you building it in a traditional apartment building? Are you doing stacked townhomes? Are you doing walk-up buildings? This is all going to play a role into the cost and also the revenue that you're getting, but also the expenses of the building. If you have an apartment building, you're going to have higher costs in common areas because you have to have corridors and fire alarm systems. If you get into a little bit bigger building, you will have basically sprinkler system. So that leads to more maintenance cost. If you go within a stacked townhome, you will have basically less cost. Or if you're doing like a simpler walk-ups that everybody have a separate entrance and you don't have common areas. So those numbers all will basically make a difference in your pro forma. You also want to decide about your construction type. Are you building with concrete? Are you building with wood, with light gauge steel or structural steel? This all plays a role. If you're building a 100+ unit, a 200 unit building, and your aim is to sell it to a REIT, you probably want to consider building it out of concrete because that's more desirable for REITs. But if you're building a smaller building, you might want to go, opt for a 5 to 6 story wood frame that is cheaper to construct and, it's less costly, less time consuming. But it all depends on who your target audience, target tenants are. And even if you're thinking about eventually selling it, who you're going to be selling it to. When it gets to like, if sometimes you might look at your zoning and see, oh, it allows like 8 story or a 7 story. Well, you need to know that you can't build a 7 story out of wood. Not yet. They're working on that in the building code side. But So you're going to be limited to 6 story. If you want to go to 7, you have to build it with concrete or steel, and it changes your basically construction cost. So these are all factors that are important. And basically, last step is to you create a number of conceptual plans, usually 2 or 3 different concepts that you want to evaluate. So next step is you want to look at the financial feasibility and the underwriting piece. This is also very, very, very important. You need to know you can't leave things to chance. You can't just start building and hope that the numbers will work at the end of the day. Also, because if you're using bank financing or using lenders in construction financing, you need to have these numbers. So based on the previous items that you have identified, your unit mix, your unit size, what kind of building, what kind of construction method you're using, now you start calculating your total project cost, which involves like land, hard cost, and soft cost. Again, we can't fit all of this in a 1.5 hour call, but basically there's a lot of components into each of those that would require a lot more time to get into. But basically, you need to come up with your total project cost. There's a lot of soft costs, your architects and designers and whatnot. Then you want to estimate your revenues and expenses. Again, what size is your units, what unit bedrooms, you want to look at comparable rents. Sometimes you need to do a rent survey or a rent appraisal and establish your potential rents. And you want to estimate your expenses. That's where you need to work with property managers or rely on your experience from your development manager or yourself and establish your NOI. That's very important because we always want to maximize NOI. That's where you can start getting creative with generating additional revenues from other things that we touched on, like self-storage, Wi-Fi, parking, and whatnot. Then you want to determine your cap rate. Again, cap rate is basically the denominator in that formula, which is almost the multiplier to the NOI for the value to determine value of the building. That to get the cap rate, there are basically multiple ways you can do that. You can do an appraisal. You can talk to some appraisers. You can talk to commercial brokers. There are also some online resources and reports that you can rely on. So once you got all of this, you can basically calculate your as complete value. You have established your cost, so you can see basically your margin. But that's not all. You want to calculate your returns. Now you're going to hold the building for 5 years, 10 years. You need to project and create basically financial modeling to have a projection of your returns based on the components that we talked about. Basically, your cash flow, your mortgage pay down, and your appreciation, basically your rent's going up. So you want to basically trend your rents. So let's say we say rents go up 3% on average over the next 5 years or 10 years. If you're a non-rent control in Toronto, a lot of people have been using 4 and 4.5%. If you're, if you were in Alberta a couple of years ago, you could justify a higher number. And then for expenses, we normally use basically inflation, 2 to 2.5%. And that basically what shows you the value of the building and your real return on investment over time. Again, we don't have time to get into that detail today. There will be other sessions in the future if anybody's interested to learn the details of that. And the next step here also is very important. You need to do a sensitivity analysis. We make some assumptions on the cap rate, on the rents, on the occupancy of the building. And basically, we need to see how sensitive we are to this, to the construction costs. What if the interest rates go up? What if my rent growth is not 4%, it's 3.5%? What if my construction cost goes 10% or 5% over budget? So we need to look at all these sensitivities and look at the risk, basically. And you need to make sure that you're okay with that risk that you're looking at. And then at that point, that's basically where you decide to go or no go. Again, you can do all this in-house, or you can engage basically external consultants to help you with this stage if you're not familiar with it. So once you have established that, yes, this is a project that works, you get into basically doing the design and permitting. If you need to do any rezoning, or you need to get a site plan approval, or you need to do any minor variances, this is the stage you need to basically start spending money to do all of that. For those who are not familiar, site plan approval is basically going to the city and showing where all the, where's your parking, where's your garbage can, where is your entrance and exit to the property, are you removing any trees and whatnot? And basically you need to get an approval from the city on that front. Minor variance is basically if you have some requirements based on the zoning bylaws, that let's say you need to have a setback in the front and you can't meet that, you need to go through the process to get that approval. And this is where also you start spending money on your environmental site assessments, or do some geotech. You might need an arborist report. You might need basically a topography survey or boundary survey. The list goes on and on. And again, there's a long list that we can't fit in tonight's call. Once you have all that information that you need, basically that goes into the architects and engineers, and they will basically come up with the design. If you're using what we will talk about, like some government programs, MLI Select, for those who are familiar, you need to do an energy modeling. This is becoming a code requirement. If you're in BC, the building code already requires energy modeling. The new 2020 building code that is becoming mandatory soon also requires energy modeling, so you need to do that as well. And then another step that you do here, and it's often overlooked, is value engineering. So what do we mean by value engineering? Value engineering is trying to basically find efficiencies in your design to create more value. Maybe you're able to use a certain type of equipment, or your HVAC equipment and whatnot, for your heating or for your hot water, domestic hot water, that will have a lower operating cost when you go to operations. Again, back to the formula of basically trying to increase the net operating income. You want to reduce your expenses. You want to have high operating expense. Maybe there is a different type of equipment that will lead to less turnover between tenants. So those are basically value engineering. Maybe there's a different construction method that you can use, because often engineers, and I'm faulty on that, I'm an engineer, so I can make joke about my fellow engineers. They basically pick the most obvious solution, not necessarily the easiest, but sometimes is the easiest solution. But because they're not the ones that are paying for this, for the construction of that, it may not be the most cost effective. Again, that's where the experience of the developer or the development manager comes into play, to basically go through the designs and basically the plans with a fine-tooth comb to find efficiencies. You can also bring in a construction basically consultant or your builder to basically provide some advice for you on basically where you can create more value. So after you have done all that, you go into the building permit. Again, the value engineering, just like some of the steps that are often overlooked, is very, very important step in the development process and should not be overlooked. Now we get to the favorite part, which is financing. So this is where the incentives, and this is what have been making a huge difference. I'm sure by now everybody has heard about MLI Select program by CMHC. Basically, you need to decide how you're financing your construction or your project. Obviously, if you're self-financing all cash, that's great. You don't have to basically put a lot of effort into this stage. But more often than not, people are using some kind of financing to build their project. So one of the big questions is, are you using conventional construction financing, or are you using CMHC construction financing? Obviously, the CMHC construction financing comes with a lot of strings attached. There's a lot more paperwork involved in doing that. So you need to basically talk to the professionals, talk to your mortgage brokers, or people who have done it a few times, and basically determine, is it worth going through the trouble to use CMHC for your construction? Or is it better to use conventional financing, construction financing, or even private financing to get the project built and then refinance it with CMHC? The MLI Select is not a fit for every project. Obviously, it has to be 5+ units. That's the context, but just as a reminder. But that's an important decision that you have to make upfront, because that also leads to how much equity you need to put into the project, and how much liquidity you need to basically get the project done. What's your net worth requirement? Those are all conditions for the MLI Select as well. Another very, very important part is the debt coverage ratio. That's basically how much money the building is generating and what is the debt you need to cover every month, including your all your building expenses, property tax, insurance, and including your debt servicing, which is your mortgage. And also you need to think about this, kind of again overlaps with the previous stage, how many points you're trying to get with MLI Select. So I'll quickly touch on what MLI Select is. Again, we don't have time to go into detail in this. So basically, MLI Select program, for those who are not familiar, is a program that was introduced by CMHC in, I believe, 2021 or 2022, to incentivize construction of new purpose-built rentals with a certain social outcomes. And the social outcomes that they target is basically affordability, energy efficiency, and affordability. In the older version of the program, you could get the 100 points, and it's a point system. So you could get 100 points just from energy efficiency, but with recent changes, you can only get 50 points if you meet all the energy efficiency requirements. Also very important to remember, it's not just energy efficiency improvement, there is reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, and these are not the same thing. Again, that's something that you would work with your energy advisor to achieve. Affordability is defined by basically percentage of the units that are at 30% or lower of the median renter's income. Very important to pay attention. It's a renter's income, not the average household income. And they publish this data. We're supposed to get updated data end of this month, which I guess would be tomorrow or the next day. Right now, CMHC is conveniently using a 2019 renter's income. So hopefully this will be a little bit higher, but who knows? The economy has not been exactly sunshine and roses in the past couple of years in Canada. And then accessibility is something that has become more important recently with the reduction of the points from energy efficiency, and people were able to use that successfully up until, I would say, like a few months ago, I think, or maybe just even very recently, they changed how they look at accessibility as well. And now pretty much you can't use this unless it's an apartment building with elevators and whatnot, because all units are required to be visitable by a person with disabilities. And basically all your units need to be, you need to have accessible washrooms. So quickly about the benefits, and that's basically what is huge and makes this program a game changer, is basically you can get a loan to cost up to 95%. So if you qualify and you meet the debt coverage ratio, which is reduced compared to conventional loans are 1.25 to 1.3, 1.2 to 1.3, but for MLI Select is only 1.1. You can get up to 95% of your total project cost. It does say loan to cost, so it's not just construction. It includes land, soft cost, and all of that can be financed up to 95%, provided that you meet the points and also the debt coverage ratio. And the next one that is huge is that your mortgage amortization can be up to 50 years, and that will really help with your cash flow. It does not help with your mortgage pay down. You're pretty much in the first, I would say, 5 to 10 years, you're paying interest mostly, but it does help your cash flow. So it's basically getting money now or getting money later. I would always take money now. So it's a huge advantage. So the last two steps, so now we're getting into basically, I guess, the meat and potato of the work. And that's where everything becomes visible and you can actually see. It gets really exciting. You put shovel in the ground, you've got your building permit. And also quick note that, you could keep your purchase of the land conditional to basically almost the point that you get your building permit. It depends how you can negotiate it. Sometimes you only do your due diligence, and basically once you've confirmed your concept that your project is working and you have decided it's a go, you can basically remove your conditions, or you have to decide it's a go or no go before the end of your conditional period. But you can negotiate, even your closing could be way later to help with the financing of the project. So it all becomes negotiation tactics. But basically, in this stage, you're qualifying your contractors and selecting them. It's very, very, very important. This is where a lot of projects go wrong because people have rushed in their selection of a contractor, or they didn't know how to qualify their contractors, or they didn't vet their contractors properly. And basically, they get into a contract, and the contractor is not performing as they should, or they didn't have enough experience. We can do a whole 2-hour session to just scratch the surface on how to select qualified contractors and how to qualify them. Next one is basically tendering. Tendering is basically the process of completing your project scope. That's basically another area that things go wrong. If your scope is not well defined, you're not going to get a reliable estimate. And that leaves the door open for your contractors to basically give you change orders later and say, this was not part of the scope. So a more detailed drawing, that comes back to like working with a good team of designers, architects, and engineers to make sure they put as much detail as possible in the drawings, because that's what's going to cover you if anything comes up later in any dispute comes up with the contractor. You're going to fall back on your drawings. And you can also ask your designers or architects to create a written scope of work, or you can do it, or your development manager can create a written scope of work to accompany the drawings. And that becomes a basis of getting quotes from your contractors that have been pre-qualified. You have to pre-qualify your contractors. Don't send this and whoever gave you the cheapest number, jump on basically negotiating with them. I would recommend qualifying them based on their capabilities first, then asking for a price, because it helps you to not be biased. Sometimes we might have an unconscious bias. Once we know this guy is cheaper, we might try to unconsciously convince ourselves that, yeah, they can do it. So qualify them first and then get proposals from them and do the tendering. Other important part is contracting. That's something that is often overlooked as well. Having a solid contract with your contractors is very important. You need to decide what type of contract you're using. CCDC is basically, if I remember correctly, what the acronym stands for, Canadian Construction or Contract something. It's basically a standard form of contracts, but you can always add terms to that. So you need to decide what type. Is it a CCDC 2, which is a lump sum or fixed price or a steep sum, different names for it? Is it a 5A or 5B, which is basically a construction management contract, which is basically you can see what they're paying and you just pay them a fixed fee or percentage of that based on their cost. We can do a whole session on the contracting type as well. And then the other important part is quality control. You need to make sure you're doing quality control on your contractors. You need to know what to check for, or if you don't know, hire someone that can do the quality control. Your basically your lender is not your quality control guy. Your quantity surveyor, which is basically the person that confirms the progress on the site, that they're not quality control. Your building inspector is not quality control. They basically just check bare minimum to meet the code. So you need to basically focus on the quality control as the developer or the development manager. Uh, Progress monitoring, that's also very important. Monitoring the progress, making sure you're staying on schedule. That's something you kind of need to build into your contract with your contractor to provide you frequent progress reporting and schedule updates. And the other one is budget control. You will get change orders. Like there's no project that goes exactly 100% as it was originally envisioned. There's always things that can change, and some of them are out of your control. Material costs can change. There are things that could pop up. So basically staying on top of your budget. Every time you get a change order, you basically make sure you're updating, you're staying on top of that, making sure you're not going to run out of money halfway through the project. So that's on the construction and basically the procurement piece. And then once you're getting closer to your basically construction completion, or we call occupancy, you need to execute your marketing plan. Ideally, you want to have this plan in place from the beginning or have some ideas. So basically, you need to create some marketing and advertising plan. Basically, are you putting a sign outside? Are you running Facebook ads? Are you running Instagram ads? What is your marketing strategy? Are you using your property manager, or you're using a leasing team? Often on smaller buildings, your property manager will basically do the leasing because you're dealing with like 5, 10 units. When you get to larger buildings, you kind of want to have a dedicated leasing team and hire leasing professionals, because that's a sales job. Property managers are often best at managing the property and dealing with issues that come up and coordinating all the activities. But when you're dealing with a vacant building that you need to occupy as quickly as possible to get into basically generating cash flow, a professional leasing team is very important, and having a proper marketing material in place. You know, when your building is not done, maybe using 3D renderings, virtual staging, and things like that to promote and create a list of interested people. You might even be able to pre-lease some units before the unit is done. Are you creating a show unit? If you have like a certain number of units, then you can basically create a show unit to get some units leased up before the entire building is done. You need to decide on your rent strategy. Are you trying to maximize rent, or are you trying to lease up the building fast? You can't have both in a normal market. So absorption rate, that's basically how many units you're renting per month. If you put your rents up, obviously your absorption rate or your absorption or leasing speed will be lower. If you want to increase your leasing speed, you need to basically price your units accordingly. I mentioned pre-leasing. It's often difficult, but you never know. If you have a larger building, you might get a couple of units leased before the whole unit or construction is complete. Are you offering incentives? So in a softer market, you often see building owners offering 1 month, 2 months free. Sometimes they offer gift cards, $1,000, free internet, and things like that. And that's all to basically attract tenants. A question that sometimes people get, and I used to think about it like years ago when I didn't know how multifamily works, is, hey, you're like giving 2 months free rent. Why don't you just break that down over the 1 year lease? That comes back to that formula again of NOI, what you're reporting to your lenders and what translates into the value of your building is how much is your lease per month based on your lease contract. Um, so if you're providing incentives, that basically is a cost, is a one-time cost, but you actually have a lease at a higher price that you can actually show for your financing. So that's the reason sometimes they offer 1 to 3 months basically free rent for people to sign up. And then the other very, very big part of this, I guess it kind of ties back to the earlier points, is your tenant screening, especially if you're in Ontario or if you're in US and you're in the states that are more tenant-friendly laws. This becomes very, very important. You need to make sure your leasing team is doing a good job, or if you're using a property manager, or if you're doing it yourself, you cannot spend enough time, or you can never spend too much time on screening your tenants. I've had situations where when I used to do it myself, you would have 70 applications to select one tenant. And sometimes you have to keep the unit vacant, especially again, if you're in Ontario, to basically make sure and wait for the right tenant. And it kind of ties back into your rent price target as well, the amenities and whatnot. If you have a nicer unit, obviously you're attracting better tenants. New builds generally attract better tenants, but still you need to be diligent with your tenant screening. So that's basically the entire life cycle of or the process involved in a multifamily development. As you can see, it's different than when you're building to sell. Obviously, you have to think long term. Also, when you build to sell, you're basically only benefiting from the forced appreciation, which is basically you build it for a certain cost and you sell it for a certain cost. You're losing out on the cash flow, on the mortgage pay down, and the market appreciation. And also, there are a lot more considerations when it comes to a purpose-built rental, because you're going to be owning and basically operating that building. So you have to think about that as well. So I'm sure you're all waiting for the important part of the night, which is what are the opportunities in 2025? I'll see if there's a question. Okay, I don't see any questions in the chat. That's good. Okay, 2025 opportunities. I can summarize this in basically one statement, and that's missing middle development. I'm sure by now you've all heard of this term. Some people call it middle housing, someone calls it missing middle. It basically was a term that was coined by Opticus. It's basically a planning firm. They came up with this name in 2010, I believe, or 2012. And it refers to any kind of development that is between a single family, or I would say townhouse, to a larger condo, high-rise, mid-rise condo, anything in between. This could be side-by-side duplexes, fourplexes, courtyard buildings, townhouses, multiplexes, triplex, and anything in between that. Like it could be even like, 10plexes. You'll hear this name a lot. I'm sure you've been hearing it a lot, but you'll hear a lot more about that. So let's talk about some of these missing middle options and where these opportunities are coming from. So the start of a lot of this was what we call Bill 23 in Ontario. This was the More Homes Built Faster Act. It allowed up to 3 units on any single family lot in Ontario. A lot of the municipalities, a lot of cities in Ontario were very restrict with only allowing single family home. I think there's a statistics that's like Toronto has a highest or used to have the highest number of or highest percentage of single family homes between all major cities in North America. So this bill changed that by allowing 3 units as of right, and municipalities cannot stop that. It basically reduced NIMBYs. NIMBY is not in my backyard. Basically, neighbors pushing back on proposals. It drastically reduced their powers to appeal an approved project. A lot of these NIMBYs basically would take the developer hostage. And they would appeal the approval of a development, and they would take another year or so. Sometimes you would have to settle it with them, paying them money. It was a ransom. Can't really use another name. It encourages cities to allow more units, which we'll talk about. Example is Toronto has allowed 4plexes plus a garden suite, which allows 5 units. But on the next slide, we'll talk about how other municipalities are allowing this as well. Another thing that changed, basically, Bill 23 was in 2022, so it's a little bit of old news, you can say. In May 2024, the government came up with this enhanced HST rebate for purpose-built rentals. So previously, or I guess still the rule is there, when you build a purpose-built rental, even if you're not selling it, you have to pay what is called a self-assessed HST on that. And if you're in Ontario, that's 13%. If you're in New Brunswick, it's 15%. If you're lucky and you're in Alberta, it's 5%. But you're basically paying HST, and it's deemed as a self-supply, and it's a HST applicable event. The new federal rule that came out in May 2024 provides 100% rebate on the federal portion of the HST, basically on the GST, and it encourages provinces to mirror the federal rebate. Many provinces have already started doing that. Ontario and New Brunswick recently, and a bunch of other provinces. But eventually, all provinces will have that. Alberta never had a provincial portion, so basically, you're not paying HST on any new builds. The requirement is minimum 4 self-containing residential units. Obviously, you have to talk to your accountants about this to make sure your development qualifies for this. For those who don't know, a development charge is basically a fee that a developer pays to the municipality when constructing a new building or significantly altering an existing one. And it's supposed to be used for costs for infrastructure and the things that they need to support the development. So one of the things that was part of Bill 23 was to encourage municipalities to reduce their development charges. You saw that on those news articles that we looked at earlier. And it's hardly a month that we don't hear about development charges being proposed to be reduced in each municipalities, because these have been a big challenge for new developments. And there are incentives for building larger rental units. 3 bedrooms, you will get more. So based on the number of bedrooms in the unit, you will get reduced development charges. So municipalities are reducing development charges, but also you will get a further discount based on the type of units that you have. And on top of that, you can defer your development charges to be paid over 6 years in 6 annual installments when basically you get your occupancy permit. So, and the latest news in that was, this one is, again, fresh off the press. I think this was Monday. City of Mississauga has just proposed major reforms to their development charges, 50% reduction in the DCs across the board, 100% reduction of the development charges for 3-bedroom purpose-built rental units, and defer of payment of all DCs from building permit to certificate of occupancy, which was already part of Bill 23, and 35 reduction in property taxes for new purpose-built rentals. Toronto is also proposing reduced property taxes for new purpose-built rentals. There's pressure on Toronto because Toronto has increased their development charges last year, but I'm pretty sure that will happen soon as well. Another part that basically part of the opportunities that exist in 2025 is a site plan control exemption. Again, this is part of Bill 23. If you're building a new apartment building or rental, purpose-built rental with 10 or fewer residential units, you're exempt from site plan control. That's the process when we talked about you have to submit your site plan to the city for them to review where is your garbage, where is your parking, and a lot of different things that they'll pick on. You would require typically to do a lot more studies to do this, and it can delay your project by a year or more. If you're in Toronto, that might be 2 to 3 years. So this is huge. It makes it a lot easier if you're going for basically the missing middle development and less than 10 units. So this is a great advantage. The other one is as of right zoning. As I touched on it, every municipality is coming up with something these days. Toronto is allowing fourplexes from garden suites. As I mentioned, Scarborough has just announced that they're allowing 5 to 6 units per lot in Scarborough. It's a proposal, but that would be a game changer. Hamilton, London, Kitchener, Guelph, and many other municipalities, even Barrie is proposing fourplexes, and a lot of other municipalities are following suit. Even Richmond Hill, that's where I live, and they have traditionally been very resistant. There are incentives by the government for them to allow these kind of developments. So that's what's driving this. Even in BC, they're allowing 6 units per lot. In Edmonton, they did that last year. They're allowing 8 units per lot. So every municipality across the country is allowing more as-of-right zonings. This is basically taking a big step out of the way, or big hurdle out of the way, which was having to go through minor variances and site plan approvals. You basically, if you're within the limitations of your zoning bylaw, you can go straight for a building permit application, which is huge. Another one, if you're thinking about larger developments, is what's called the Toronto Major Streets Policy. It's under appeal now, but it will most likely get passed. So it's basically permits small scale apartment buildings along major streets. And major streets are not just a random name. It can be an avenue or whatever it's called, but there's a certain definition and there's a map. And it's in the neighborhoods. Neighborhoods, again, have a specific definition in Toronto, where traditionally they were not allowing larger apartment buildings. This overlaps a bunch of other policies in Toronto. Toronto is a complicated city in terms of planning, but this is huge because it will allow, if passes the appeal, it will allow up to 6-story and 60 units without having to go through official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment, which would traditionally require 2 to 3 years. And that's a huge, huge step for fast tracking development projects in Toronto, and it's going to help alleviate some of the needs. And this is basically the news article from January 21st that they announced that Toronto looks at permitting 5 and 6 plexes in Scarborough North. So that's big. I think if that's one of the best opportunities today. So some of the strategies that you can implement to take advantage of these opportunities in 2025. One of them that is very common, and it's a great entry point for anyone getting into developments, is what we call a severance plus CMHC-MLI select. So you can take a lot and sever it And based on Bill 23, even if you're not in those cities that they allow more, you're allowed to do two triplexes, basically a triplex or a fourplex, depending on where you are, on each of those lots. So severance is when you take a property and basically split it to half. And you can do three on each side or four on each side, depending on where you are. This photo at the bottom is a project that I've been working on. This is in Thorold, or basically St. Catharines. This is a slight variation. It's a keep and sever. Basically, this is the existing building. I have severed this property. It's a corner lot, and created a new lot where it used to be the backyard. I'm planning to convert the existing property to a triplex and add another triplex on the new lot, and it will be 6 units, more than 5 units, and I can refinance it with MLI Select. That's a project I'm working on this year. These are some examples that I've taken pictures as I drive around. This one is in Oshawa. You can see they've taken one residential property and they've actually created two triplexes on each side of, basically one triplex on each side of the semi-detached. You can see there are two doors here and one door on the side, and then basically mirrored on the other side. And there's one more exactly the same on the lot next to it. So these are great, great projects. They're not too complicated. If you have some experience with building a single family home, or if you're a custom home builder, you can easily execute these. The pro forma is not too complicated. You can do it yourself, or we can help you with that. And they're great, I would say almost a bite size. This one is in Toronto. You can see there are basically 3 levels. This one, you can't see it, but there are entrances on the side, and there's an entrance to the basement in the front. So it's a semi-detached with 4 units on each side, and now it's 8 units. So in the municipalities that they allow 4 units per lot, you might be able to find a lot that is wide enough, or it's on a corner. You sever it, and you put 4 and 4 or 3 and 3, and you can basically do a takeout with CMHC, and you can go up to 95% if you qualify, depending on where you are and your cost. So this is a huge, huge opportunity right now in Ontario specifically. In Alberta, or if you're in BC, you can do 6 units on one lot. So those are great opportunities as well. Another one that is very big right now in Toronto is these fourplexes from Garden Suites. I'm helping with a couple of clients with these projects, either being a conversion or a full demo and build. Very fast approvals, relatively speaking, to other proposals in Toronto. And you can basically get MLI Select on this because it's technically 5 units. There are some, complications with, like, trying to avoid the development charges. I didn't mention it here, but you're exempt on development charges in Toronto on the 4 units. And if you do it separate phases, you get the permit for the fourplex. You're exempt from the development charges. And the garden suite is exempt from development charges as well. So this is a great, great opportunity. You're going to be hearing a lot more about this in Toronto. There are some of the examples of projects that my friends are doing. This one by JL Investments, and this one by Proximity Developments. This is another one. It's a conversion. You can see it's what we call like a top up. And then there's a garden suite at the back. This one, you can see the garden suite here, kind of. And this one is on a corner lot. So it's on this side. So this is huge. And the best part is this works on almost all residential lots in Toronto, in wherever it's city of Toronto. And it can be a new or conversion. I've seen this being done on 20-foot lots. Especially, you can basically use the existing walls to avoid minor variances and whatnot. There is still a little bit of, what do you call it, like method to the madness. The where you put your stairs and secondary exits and things like that. There are considerations. Obviously, the unit size and mix depending on where you are. how are you generating additional income? Those are all considerations as well, because obviously you're dealing with Toronto and you're looking at, I would say, a minimum 900,000 to a million for the purchase of the existing property. Another one that basically we touched on is 10 unit or less developments. You don't have to do a site plan approval. You go straight to building development, building permit if you don't have any minor variances. You can use MLI Select for the construction. Obviously, it's more than 5 units. You have to qualify for it, and you might be able to get up to 95%. This also falls, the 8 plexes in Toronto, in Edmonton, and Calgary falls under this. Obviously, the site plan approval is different there. You need a development permit, but it's not a big issue. And you can use MLI Select. That has been very common recently. I'm sure most people have heard about it by now. And the best part is these are Part 9 building. So for those who are not familiar, the building code has 2 major sections. There's a Part 9 and Part 3. Part 3 is larger buildings. When it's, there are certain criteria, more than 4-story or more than 600 square feet at the base. You would have to have a sprinkler system and a lot more complicated fire alarm systems and safety requirements. Part 9 buildings are simpler buildings. They're basically the residential single-family duplex townhouses. This is actually a project I'm working on. Again, another project that is lined up for this year. It's a 10-unit development in Welland. This is a kind of an inspiration picture, but basically we will have some units in the basement, units on the ground floor, and units above. It's a corner lot, so it allows us to put parking on one side and have the front on the other side of the lot, and it gives us a little bit more flexibility. So this is another project that I'm personally working on this year. And another one, which is the last one we're going to talk about tonight, is basically in-place densification. This is huge. This has been happening for a while now, is looking at your existing property and basically determining where you can add more density. This on the right is a project for those who have been following me. It's in London. The brick part was this existing building, 9-unit. We looked at the zoning. It was a larger lot. You can see here, that's the site plan. And we were able to add more units. So we are adding 5 units into this building, turning it into 14 units. We opted for adding the units on top because, as you can see here, it's a fairly large lot, and we can always go back and ask for another building to be added on the site, or we can basically put it on the, there's a lot of space in the area that we can add more buildings. So this is huge because you will have a very low land cost. In the case that you do a severance, you're lowering your cost, but in this case, your land is almost free. It's not exactly free because you still have to pay for the permitting and whatnot. But it's a very effective way to make the numbers work, especially on a mid-size development. And it's possible to use MLI Select financing. There are some complications in terms of, are you on the same title with the existing building? Do you want to do a severance? If you're on the same building, you might have to use what's called a refinance plus improvement. But again, we don't have time to get into those details tonight. And this is highly favored by municipalities. This one in the center is actually a project that we're working on in New Brunswick, in St. John, New Brunswick. We have a 6-plex in the middle of the lot. It's a fairly large lot, and we're proposing to add up to 50, 60 units on the same property. And municipalities are in favor of this because it's a good use of an underutilized space. And they're collecting property tax when this is built. And they often don't need to, upgrade infrastructure. There's an existing infrastructure. And density is always good for cities. So they're always in favor of these kind of projects. So I will encourage anyone that owns a property that seem to have a larger than typical lot to explore what is possible, maybe do a feasibility study and see what you can basically add to your building. You might have to do rezoning. In this scenario, and the one in the center, we are doing rezoning on that. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Bottom line is we are here to help at EcoLux Developments. There are different ways that we can help you. Training and coaching. For those who know me, I do coaching through a different group, but we'll have some training as well, more in-depth training. As mentioned, we do development management and consulting for other developers or for those who have invested in multifamily. They maybe want to get into development, but they're not familiar with it or they don't have the time. As mentioned, we can basically do all of this work. We can do a feasibility study for you to see if your project is feasible, or if you're doing the project yourself and you just need a little bit of help, we can basically help you as consultants along the way. Or if you rather, be completely passive, that's an option as well. Obviously, this is only available for accredited investors, friends, family, and business associates. But basically, in these projects, you can be involved in our projects passively, and we'll do all the work, and we basically own and operate the building as well, and distribute the profits between investors. So before you go anywhere, I have one big announcement for training and coaching. We couldn't get into all the details, so mark your calendars. We're going to have a full day of a workshop from 9 to 4 p.m. on March 8th is a Saturday. Save the date. You will get an email tomorrow with the link to the recording and also with the link to for early bird pricing on this in-person. We'll get into the in-depth with all the stuff that we talked about today. We will have other professionals available there, mortgage brokers and whatnot, if you want to get more in depth into the MLI Select. So mark your calendars. You don't want to miss this. And with that, thank you very much. If you want to get in touch with me, you can scan the QR code, you can book some time, and we can chat about any of these things that we talked about here. Being it about training and coaching, if you're interested in that, or you have a project that you want to talk about, or you're interested to learn more about our projects, scan this QR code, take your phones out, just point it, take your camera, for those who are not familiar, open your camera, point it at the QR code, and you will be able to book a time on my calendar directly from there. So that's the end of my presentation. I think I managed to get to, I guess I did exceed the time quite a bit, but I hope that's okay. I see there's still a lot of people here. We had over 65 people at the peak of it. Thanks for those who are sticking around. I'll open it for Q&A. I'm okay to stay another 10-15 minutes. So raise your virtual hand. You go to the reactions and you can raise your hand and I can answer any questions. Let me check the chat as well. Feedback. So question here, as I navigate the step 0 stages of a new build project in St. John, New Brunswick, I've been considering the following key steps: determine unit count, engage with the city and architect to establish number of units. Basically all these steps there. Okay, thank you for sharing that, Suman. Yeah, Kira mentioned that she's doing 8 and 14 units in St. John. That's awesome. Love to see other developers in this space. Abby, as mentioned, is new to the multifamily, interested in getting involved, participate, learn from everyone. Connecting, yeah, I would love to connect with everyone. That's the idea here. Itati is asking, for what city is the site plan control exemption? So this is in Ontario. So the Bill 23 is an Ontario bill. So site plan control is exempt. In Alberta, the development permit is a lot easier, especially for the 8 units. There are some exemptions provided by City of Edmonton and City of Calgary. And generally, the development permit, or what we call site plan here, or site plan control, is not as big a issue in Alberta. Like we have done that in Alberta and can be done very quickly. So it's not as big an issue. It's more of an Ontario problem. Yeah, Kieran is saying no development permit needed for Burnaby in BC. That's awesome. Again, like more and more municipalities are basically they're giving that discount. George and Joanne, I was talking with someone the other day who is looking at doing this in Toronto. That's great. Yeah, there's a lot of people looking at, I'm assuming you're talking about the 4+1s in Toronto. Great project, Ali. Thank you for the support. Suman is saying, I came across this part 9 and part 3 jargon while working with architects in Canada, part 9 building. Okay, so there's a little bit of the explanation. Thank you, Suman, for sharing that. Great presentation. Thank you. Thank you, Ali, for joining. That's a different Ali. Yeah, thanks, everyone. So I don't see any other questions. David is saying it was a fantastic, insightful session. Thank you, David. Mary says, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm happy you guys like it. Mo is asking, I may have missed this, but can you get MLI Select financing before starting construction or after the build is complete? So that's a great question. There are two ways you can do it. You can get MLI Select construction financing, or you can get a conventional construction financing or private construction financing, and then do a refinance with CMHC with the MLI Select program. But you just have to make sure that your building qualifies for those points. So you need to plan for it ahead of time to make sure that's all built into your design. But yeah, you can do it both ways. And that's part of the strategy that you have to basically decide on. CMHC has changed the rules slightly. You need to have if there is an existing structure, it needs to be demolished before you can apply for construction financing. So that is causing some headache for developers. And on the smaller projects, it might make more sense to go with conventional, get the construction started, or self-fund it, and then get the CMHC financing. Suman is asking, do you provide consulting services for projects in the GTA only? No, anywhere that I've done projects myself in Alberta and New Brunswick, I can provide consulting. And running numbers, the feasibility, pro forma, and financial projections, that is basically, that can be applied to any project anywhere. But when it gets into the development management, I can do it in the provinces that I've done work with. Obviously, my focus is on Ontario. Mo is asking, is there a checklist or a cheat sheet for the point system? That's all on the website. We will talk extensively about that in the workshop, but basically when you go to CMHC website and if you search for MLI Select, they have a pretty good comprehensive page, and there is a PDF version of that as well. Thank you, Vincent. Bhaskar is asking, so what is profit for 10-unit building if build and sell or build and rent? You would have to run the numbers. Building to sell, you would have to control your cost very effectively. Holding the building or renting it, that's where you make the most profit. That's what I was talking about earlier in the presentation. The value of the building mostly, or the most of the return on your investment comes from holding it, because it comes from the cash flow, from the mortgage pay down, and also from the appreciation. And because the rents go up and cap rates get compressed, the value goes up through time. What are idea for profit compare for 10-year comparison? It's varies project by project. We don't start projects unless they have at least minimum 15 years, 15% per year return on investment. That's the target. We try to target between 15 and 20%. Ajinkia, I hope I didn't butcher the name. What are best tips on screening a contractor since it's the most important part? So screening contractors, there's a lot, but I would say you would definitely have to look at similar projects that they have done. You don't want to be their guinea pig. If somebody says, "Oh, I've done similar projects, but they're a little bit smaller or less complicated," but that's okay. I can basically they're stretching themselves. You don't want to be the one that pays for that for their learning experience. The other thing is like even if they have done projects of the same size and they have the experience, definitely go and see one of their projects and see how organized their site is. It might be interesting to know, like, if their site is clean and organized, especially if you show up towards the end of the day and they have like materials all over the place, there's no safety board or nothing, that basically shows that they're not professionals. So those are like maybe two quick tips that I can share without getting in too much detail here. Mo is asking, are you finding any issues with turning an urban residential property into a fiveplex without any parking? If you're in Toronto, you're most likely exempt from parking. In fact, the fourplexes are exempt from parking. Garden Suite is exempt from parking in Toronto. If you're going above 5 units, there is no parking requirement per se, but there is certain requirements for like visitor parkings and whatnot. And if you're closer to transit areas, you can be exempt from that as well. So those are the things that you need to look at, or we can help you with that during the feasibility study to make sure what your parking requirements are for the project. Suman is asking, what is the highest number of units you have developed in a single building or consulted on? The largest one that I've worked on was 150 units. If you have a project of that size, I would probably, we will have to talk about it, but I'm comfortable helping with any project between 5 and 60 units per se. Do you vet the local builders, collaborate with them, and charge project management fee? Yes, so we charge in the development management model. We basically charge a development management fee, which is a small cost, a percentage of the overall project cost. Does your feasibility analysis cover this aspect? Yes, in the feasibility analysis, we would include the construction management, project management fees, and all those costs. And we will work with you and if you have a team to make sure we capture all the costs. Any tips on how to increase my knowledge on zoning around Ontario? Shameless plug here, you can come to the workshop. We will, get into more detail about zoning. There's also, lots of programs out there, the development, but just if you want to do it on your own, read the zoning bylaws. If you're focused on a certain area, you need to know your zoning bylaw by heart, pretty much, or have a really good understanding of what your zoning bylaw allows. And obviously, when it gets to like more detailed version, you can basically work with your architects, planners, and whatnot. So that's all the questions I have in the chat. If anybody wants to raise their hand, go off mute, we can do that as well. So you can raise your virtual hand and ask a question. Going once, going twice, going 3 times. Okay, so I guess there are no further questions. Thank you, everyone who stayed to the end. Thanks for being here, and look out for an email with the recording and some links and whatnot. Good to see all the familiar faces here, and have a good night, everyone. Bye.